Welcome to another episode of Inspirado Projecto. Today is March 16th, almost St. Paddy's Day. This particular episode you're listening to, I'm going to split it up in, I think, 4 different parts. This is the first part. This is with Frank Nora, interviewed on July 17th, 2024. This is before Yachtly Crew, my yacht rock band, played at the Mayo Performing Arts Center in Morristown, New Jersey. I was able to meet up with him, and later, J.C. Pepe. He comes around in episode 3, so keep your ears peeled. You're most likely listening to this on Spotify. This goes out to all kinds of podcast apps, all kinds of podcast directories. All of them. It goes out to all of them. A documentary is coming out called Thank You Very Much about Andy Kaufman. Frank Nora I met through the Andy Kaufman shenanigans. He and I are huge fans of Andy Kaufman, and we both followed the rabbit hole, if you will, of AndyKaufmanLives.com, a very interesting website that came out probably early in 2000s. And you're going to hear a lot of geeking out about that. Thank you so much for listening to Inspirado Projecto, and tune in. Something fun is going to happen.
The tour bus now.
I'm here with Frank Nora of Overnightscape, a.k.a. the Rampler. Oh my God, I can't believe it. This is so cool. All right, so I want you to see. Yes, I want you to see what this. This. Oh yes, please.
Huh?
Yeah, if you could close that behind you. I know it's a heavy door, but. Oh, that's great.
Ooh, nice and air conditioning.
Yes. So this is the front lounge. A lot of times, we're watching movies in here. This has what they call, I think it's called a slide out or something. So that's why, this is pushed out more. Usually it's in line with this.
Yeah.
So, everyone's a lot closer. But when we have room, we're able to kind of push it out a little bit. This is the bathroom. That's the shower. The shower doesn't actually work. So we store a bunch of stuff in there. So we just store stuff in there. This is called Bunk Alley.
Oh wow, look at this.
Isn't that crazy? This is my bunk right here.
I was just watching that movie Some Like It Hot, and the bunks in that movie were exactly like this.
Yeah. On the train bunks.
Yeah, exactly.
I always wanted to ride on one of those trains.
Yeah.
Have you ever ridden on one of those trains in the train bunk?
I don't think so.
No? I always wanted to. Oh, sorry, Phil. Sorry, this is my buddy Frank. I just wanted to show him what the tour bus looked like.
How you doing, boss?
Yep, good to meet you.
Good to meet you.
This is
too.
Philly Ocean, lead
Taking a
singer.
little nap.
Yep,
No
good to
worries.
see
Sorry, I didn't know you were back here. But that's where we play video games and stuff back there.
Very
And
nice.
Dungeons and Dragons and watch movies and it's
So you stay in this bus exclusively? You do any hotels or anything? Or?
we have some. Actually, we could record right in here if you want, since it's air conditioned.
Yeah.
I wanted to find a place that didn't have any background music playing.
Yeah.
Just because I don't know. I upload this through my own way. It's now
Yeah.
called Podcasters for Spotify for Podcasters or something. It used to be called Anchor FM.
Yeah.
That's how I used my.
Okay. Yeah.
For my
I remember
podcast.
Anchor. Yeah.
Yeah, and then it just distributes to all these different places. But now, I don't know how they act with background sounds or whatnot. But so okay, I don't think I ever found out how exactly did you enter into the Andy Kaufman Lives mythos. Did you find him on Twitter? Were you looking at the site, and then how did you stumble across it?
So, back in 2008, I was an early Twitter user, and I tweeted way too much. I was tweeting 20, 30 times a day, and or maybe more, and all about all sorts of conspiracy theory stuff, weird stuff, everything. And apparently, our friend Steve Maddox was scouring Twitter, trying to find anyone that was into conspiracy theories, weird stuff. And so he started messaging me as Andy Kaufman at the time, and it just sort of skyrocketed from there. he said, "Would you like to do an interview?" So he did this interview, as you may recall, with a voice changer as Andy Kaufman. And I don't know, because when we've been chatting with him, he'll go on many different channels. One with you and me and John, one with just you and me, one with just me and John, one with just me. But he made a comment that in that interview, he implied that he also had like Andy on the other line.
Oh.
So he was implying that the real Andy was there, like answering some of the questions as well. Not to say that's true, but I thought that was an interesting new wrinkle.
That is interesting. Did he recently review this to you?
Yeah, it was just in the past few weeks.
Interesting.
Yeah. As you know, he's been changing his story over time, which is not really the most doesn't give you the most confidence in the truth of the story. But it's interesting that what's happened in the last few months is that he claims that he made a 40-year agreement with Andy to help perpetuate or to help create this Andy Kaufman Lives phenomenon, and now the contract is up, so he's sort of free from it now in a way. And I just texted him. I was thinking he would secretly be in Morristown right now and kind of like lurking around in costume, but apparently no, he's in Indiana. But he said he's in a mood to answer any questions, so we can ask him. He's like in a weird mood, so we can ask him stuff, and he might answer it better.
It's crazy how now it seems like he's spilling out more information.
Yeah.
And then this whole YouTube channel that now all of a sudden he's like, it says I believe in Andy, and he's got I can't quite figure out what the heck he's doing, but I've noticed in each of these videos he'll mention a tiny sliver about Andy Kaufman, a tiny little smidgen sliver that really doesn't necessarily have to do with the rest of the video, right? He just sneaks it in there.
Yeah, so it was interesting because for anyone that doesn't know, earlier in the show I kind of mentioned that this whole thing where Steve is contacting people, making events online, going on shows, and kind of stopped, 10 or 15 years ago.
Yeah.
And it came surging back just a few months ago.
Yeah.
And it's been bizarre. Like I described it was just me and him chatting for like over a month in the strangest, most surreal thing, because it's sort of like...
On the Facebook Messenger,
yeah, on
right?
the Facebook. And it was like... Because I didn't really know, like... I'm just sort of constantly pressing him for more information, and it seems like we're on friendly terms, but you never, you know what I mean? Like it's just a weird, and I always think it's at any moment he's going to stop and delete everything.
Oh yeah,
but it went on and on. It was really, really interesting.
It was interesting because I tried to go back in there and reread all that stuff, and then I saw he was putting up videos, and I thought, how can I actually download videos from Facebook? How can I actually do this?
Yeah.
And then I was looking on Twitter. I noticed the huge amount of videos and all this stuff, and I'm going, how do I download this out of Twitter? I wanted to keep this stuff because he used to have Andy Kaufman TV, on YouTube, where he'd show sort of the quote Bigfoot unquote sightings out there of who he calls Lynn, walking through the parking lots and at his behind the counter at wherever the gas station was or something.
Well, that incident was more. That's when they wanted me to come on a TV show, like extra, one of those TV shows, and I felt it had just kind of gotten too far. I felt this was like a random guy, and now he's saying it was just a random guy that had nothing to do with anything. That,
oh my gosh.
And that it was on the edge of this guy's life being ruined by people coming to harass him. And I'm like, I really don't want anything to do with that. And Steve was like, oh, that's good. It makes it sound more realistic that you're refusing. Great. No matter what I do, I'm helping perpetuate
it
the whole
sounds more
thing.
Realistic. Yeah.
I'm like, well, I don't know. There is a moral factor to all this. I don't want to harass a random guy,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
He looked kind of like Andy, but Anyway.
Especially when they put the side-by-side photos together when we were interviewed by the Huffington Post.
Yes.
You're like, that could be him. And then, of course, they do the special morphing picture. Whenever people do the morph, and then you go, my God, that looks exactly like that person. I guess in a lot of cases you can kind of do that with a lot of people, and they look similar to a person, huh?
And he did say that, and I kind of pressed him on his contact with Andy, and he says he is still in contact with Andy, and that Andy definitely saw the press conference footage. Again, who knows if any of this is true? I think that's sort of a given at this point. But what he had said about Andy starting to do this video show, he had a video camera. He would just film himself starting in '84, doing a show like every day, and this is all archived. Andy's 40 years of private shows.
Whoa!
That he's implying is part of the cache of material that's now in the hands of a law firm or some sort of financial institution. And that will be released over the next couple hundred years.
Oh my gosh! Oh my
gosh! Can you imagine it?
Oh my gosh. How do you put the life of something like that into the hands of people who, after you figure after 100 years, like, do we really need to continue this dream? Or do we still need to do this? Or does it not matter anymore?
Well, I was saying, like, if you're under 30 now, people probably had never heard of Andy Kaufman.
Right.
And now with the AI video stuff, in a few years, someone's like, here's Andy doing a show. Yeah, well, that's AI, Like, no one's going to believe it.
Right. And then Steven, of course, says, well, that's what makes it even better, right? Because then it is convoluted.
Yeah.
But you're like, well, come on now.
He's saying he wants Andy to be completely forgotten, and then somehow the information comes out and it saves humanity in some way.
That's right.
It got to this weird sort of grandiose vision of saving humanity.
Yeah.
From something that's just fun. Oh, did this comedian that was very tricky guy fake his death?
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's and then of course Steve himself has said many times that he's been doing a video show every day for 40 years as well, and he did post a few clips of that. Very few clips, including exactly what he looked like when he was in his early 20s on Facebook. And I keep asking him. He said he might start releasing it. I'm like, that sounds cool. I would watch that.
It would be cool. Yeah. It would be nice. Yeah.
But I guess what he said is, like, he can, like, episode 1 could have footage from '84, could have footage from, like, 1995 inserted into it, and so he's going to mix and match footage and make this series of tens of thousands of episodes.
Oh my gosh. So it just keeps hopping back and forth through the time.
That's what he said. And then when I recently asked him about it, he sort of shrugged it off, like, oh yeah, you're never going to see that.
Oh my gosh.
It's just been this whole back and forth thing.
Yeah.
But I've been podcasting for so long. I have, like, thousands and thousands of shows, so I'm sort of, it's weird that, like, I'm doing this thing and he's saying he's doing this kind of thing as well. It's all for the people in the future. He's like, it's no coincidence.
It is incredible
how many... Cosmic...
Well, for a guy who loves coincidences as much as he does, and yet still, like, go, oh, there's nothing spiritual about it, that's what makes it so funny to me, because it's like, I absolutely love coincidences, but I call them synchronicity, because I see a direct connection between my intention and then seeing it evolve into my life. And whether someone calls that delusional or not, who cares? It's my own little game that I'm playing with myself. It's like, oh, when I think so strongly, let's say we say right now, we talk about some very specific thing. Okay, bam, if it pops up in 20 minutes, I'm going to say, you know what? Just play a little game and say, that's there because we just talked about it and we imagined it, you know?
And another amazing synchronicity is that the guy we're going to be talking to later, John, he works at a place called the Joker's Child, a comic shop up in Fair Lawn, New Jersey.
Oh.
Which is almost right next door to this place that was very important to me. Back in the 80s, I was publishing a comic book called Anything But Monday. You can actually find copies of it on eBay still.
Really? And you drew it?
I drew a few things, but it was more like a comedy magazine with lots of different artists and stuff.
Oh, cool.
Anything But Monday magazine, if you want to look it up.
Kind of like a Mad magazine, huh?
Yeah. So, our business was failing, so we brought in a business partner, this photographer named Jim, and he had a photo studio up in Fair Lawn, and I wound up sort of basing my operations out of there, and in fact, I was almost like living there for a while. I had like a futon on the ground and one of those old black and white TV telephone alarm clock combos.
Amazing.
And so John is working like right next door to that.
Incredible how that stuff comes around.
It's just, there's just like more and more of these coincidences.
Well, and plus it has Joker in the name, right? So recently it was revealed to us what Joker means to Stephen.
Well, that sort of goes into his, and what I found really fascinating, he talked so much about the system he came up with or that he saw when he was a child, like this moment of epiphany. And I kind of went through the same thing when I was younger, coming up with all of these ideas that I was so convinced about. But personally, and after quite a bit of work and therapy and stuff, I think that it was largely delusional in my case, and I can admit that now. And so it's so oddly similar to what I was going through, because it's the grandiosity of it and the of course it could be true, but it really struck a nerve for me because it's very similar to kind of my whole experience. But not to say it's still incredibly interesting, that we're these animals on this planet and we used to just survive out in the wilderness, and now we have this technological society, and for us to sort of handle it, we create these incredible, perhaps, delusions in our minds, and there's something amazing and beautiful about that as well.
There is, and I think too, the crazy thing is there have been so many completely bizarre and unexpected turns of events that have happened through the time. I mean,
Yeah.
everyone kept saying that the Cubs would never win, and yet the Cubs won, right?
One
that
year,
to
one
me is
year after
one.
in Back to the Future, by the way.
Oh, I love that. So it's crazy to think that, like, okay, something like that so many people just kept saying, that'll never happen, when something like that pokes through, you go, okay, now anything is possible.
Yeah.
And what happened during quarantine? We kept seeing those monoliths pop up everywhere,
Yeah.
more and more UFO sightings. There's all this stuff that was happening where it's like, okay, I'm not even surprised at this point. I'm not even surprised. If God still started walking through the town, I would not even be surprised.
Well, you heard we had a
at this point.
meteor yesterday. Did you hear about that?
No, I didn't hear about that.
So all over New Jersey and New York yesterday, people were hearing this huge explosion. Their houses were shaking.
Whoa.
I heard it. To me, it sounded like thunder in the distance, and no one quite knows what it was. There was no seismic activity, but they think it was meteors breaking up in the atmosphere. But no
Whoa.
one's quite sure what it was. But it was hundreds, if not thousands, of reports.
Oh my God. Did you hear anything?
I
or
heard
see anything?
what sounded like thunder in the distance very briefly, and I didn't think anything of it, but there was no storms in the area, so I think that's what I heard. So yeah, it was like sort of a huge asteroid flying over New Jersey and breaking up in the atmosphere.
You are listening to Inspirado Projecto podcast. Yeah, make sure to check out the new concept album, Andy Kaufman is Alive, now available on Bandcamp, Spotify, Instagram, Pandora, and other music streaming sites. Now, back to Inspirado Projecto.
More weirdness.
I think because of these strange things happening, I mean, these things just add to it, but like, I think this is it kind of gives part of a reason behind why I really appreciate the unexpected, the unknown. I make space for it.
Yeah.
I allow for those things to happen. I allow for the most strangest things to possibly show up, and they do. So when I look at this idea of like, oh, I've casted a line, and now it hooked on something. What's that over there? And I reel it in, and before I know it, it lines up exactly with something that I had thought about or imagined, or and I've seen so many things, and you probably have too, where it's happening where you thought, ooh, wouldn't this be a cool idea for a song, or wouldn't this be a cool name for a band, or a cool name for whatever, and all of a sudden, zip, maybe a month later, all of a sudden now there's a movie with that exact title, or that exact premise, or some new celebrity who's got that exact name that you thought of for a cool character for something, and you go, okay, well, evidently I'm onto something. I'm either prophesying it, or I'm causing it to happen, or it's a piece of both.
Well, there was a guy in Ireland named Eddie that's been doing shows on my network for many years, and my episode titles are just kind of random. They're almost like album covers.
Mm-hmm.
So one was called Your Infomercial Days, Champ, and it showed this like abandoned gas station at night. And I was sort of thinking about, like celebrities that eventually get to that infomercial stage of their career. It's like, Your Infomercial Days, Champ.
Yeah.
And he told me, he was freaked out. He's like, I thought of that exact phrase and I was going to use it in my show. Yeah. And then his show art, I redid his show art, so it was like these 3 trees on a hill, and without talking to him about it, and he's like, that's exactly what I wanted. So like this weird connections like that.
And you know what? And the more that we find people like that who are operating on our frequency, that's something to pay attention to. Those are the people that I keep in my life, because I know that there's some kind of, we're tuned in on the same thing. Chances are we're both kind of investigating similar areas of interests and whatnot.
Yeah.
And before you know it, that's where people go, oh, we're on the same brainwave. Well, yeah, we're tuned in to a similar frequency. And then before you know it, it seems like you're reading the mind of the person that you're talking to.
Well, I mean, there's a theory about called morphic resonance. I don't know if you're familiar with it.
Mm-mm.
So this guy, Rupert Sheldrake, he's a scientist, but he's considered pseudoscience by the establishment. But he is saying that all things are interconnected, all shapes are interconnected, all minds are interconnected. And to me, it makes more sense that all the processing is going on in your brain as opposed to an external system. So imagine all around us is kind of like everything ever. And the way that we operate is that we have these specific filters or keys over our consciousness that gives us our experience, our cognition, our thoughts, and everything else. So the idea is that your key going into this system, right, if it's of a certain type, as you're saying, you would be experiencing similar things to other people with the same key or the same filter, right? So that's one theory about how this all might work.
That's a cool way of putting it.
Yeah.
That's a really cool way of putting it, because then, in a sense, you all have that key to that door of information that's going to swing open and surprise you with it.
But it's almost sort of like right on the other side of the screen, whatever you want to say, is kind of this seething mass of information that is kind of like everything that could ever happen. and we're only able to tolerate it because of the filter, sort of like sunglasses kind of thing. But if you've ever noticed, when you're waking up in the morning and going to sleep at night, there's this hypnopompic phase, which is right as you're waking up. It's about 2 or 3 seconds between sleep and waking, where I have experienced intense blasts of information, which are specifically printed documents, phrases, but like I'll have the phrase and then also the spelling of it, the exact spelling and the exact pronunciation, seeing documents and stuff. So my theory is that the filter, there's a tiny gap in the filter, and you're sort of getting a glimpse at pure information. The only other person I think, people talk about hypnopompic as being kind of a hallucinatory state, but about seeing printed documents, Philip K. Dick wrote about it in one of his books, that he would see printed documents. And
wow.
I do have a lot of commonality with what I understand about Philip K. Dick, which may not be good because he went nuts.
Well, but it's always interesting when you find yourself having an epiphany, something strikes you like lightning and you go, ooh, that's a cool idea, or that's a cool phrase, or that's a cool philosophy. And then you end up finding retroactively someone like Philip K. Dick or Alan Watts or who have you, they end up maybe either saying an exact same phrase, like you just whittled it down to, you've whittled down that information to a specific phrase. Now all of a sudden you're like, wait, Alan Watts said that thing? Like, whoa, we're totally, then you go, then to echo back to your theory of the key, you're like, oh, we must have a similar key here to that similar information.
Yeah. But I think, with this whole situation with Steve and Andy Kaufman and everything, and how he has continually said there will be no resolution to all this stuff, of course, I still hold some hope.
Me
At
too.
the press conference, I really was like, well, maybe Andy will appear. We don't know. I do think, though, that it brings up so many interesting themes of celebrity and death and imagination, delusion, everything else. So I find it brings up so many interesting issues that it's worth following. As you may remember, back at the height of it, 2008, 2009, maybe 2010, a lot of my listeners were very upset and done with it, and they didn't want to hear any more about it. It was like it had gone too far, but I never felt it went too far.
The thing is that that information at least is archived now. Your future self can go back and listen to it. Anybody can go back and listen to it. I've used that link in many things. Like I wrote 2 articles about the whole, on 2 different occasions on these different websites. One called Hub Pages and one called I forgot what the heck the other one was called, Head Stuff or something like that. And so basically, I kind of talked a little bit about it, but then I provided lots of hot links in there, hyperlinks, and so of course I linked back to Andy Kaufman press conference video that luckily I was able to save from YouTube and put
I
it up on the
re-uploaded
video.
it too.
Oh, good.
So that was Manny the Mailman, who was at the
Manny
press
the
conference,
Mailman,
yes.
and then on top of it, your audio from it, from your very own site. I've linked that on many occasions. So at least there's this trail that people can follow, and go through it all.
And the thing is, as something I'm waiting for, I just asked ChatGPT yesterday, can you listen to my shows and write up show notes? Because I have a lot of old episodes that didn't have show notes. Thinking like, did ChatGPT get this far yet? It's like, sorry, pal, I can't do that. Doesn't it sound like something that ChatGPT could do? Take the audio file, convert it to text, parse it, and then make a summary of it.
Yeah.
No, I can't do that yet.
It would be phenomenal, because then you could go, okay, how many times in episodes, what episodes, and how many times have I mentioned the word, let's say, synchronicity?
Exactly.
Or, any of these specific
So
things.
in my archive, I have 14,500 hours, which is over 1 year and 8 months of audio.
Whoa.
Which means that I would need an AI to go in and cross-reference everything, so then it could take all the information, say, about this topic, Andy Kaufman lives, and cross-reference all of it.
Oh, yeah.
And like even what we're mentioning on today's show, little bits and pieces. Sometimes we only mention it once in this entire mass bit of audio. So when this happens, which should be soon, I'm hoping, we will. People will have a lot more fun researching it. Hey.
Yeah, and ideally then it'll kind of be like an index of sorts that you'll find like in the back of the book. Then you go, oh, okay, how many times was this idea or this thought or this word used? I'm sure it's coming right around the corner.
It seems like something you should be able to do, but I guess they're just not there yet, or I'm just hoping it'll be part of their free services, but I know eventually this stuff is going to cost money.
Well, you were able to transfer your audio into books, right? Because you made books based on your podcast, didn't you?
Yeah, so the book is basically a list of, the print book is 500 pages, a list of all the episodes, episode titles, their dates, and their times, and then the PDF version, so that's the print version. The PDF version is over 4,000 pages and has all the show notes from all the shows, everything in one place.
Whoa.
It all takes about a terabyte, and a terabyte of storage has not gone down in price in a long time. Mm-hmm. It's still $50, $100 at least. It's not,
my gosh.
You remember when you had the 1 gigabyte drive, 1 megabyte drive?
Yes.
And then it kept going down in price. You could get a little memory stick for $3. It hasn't happened with a terabyte yet. So
whoa.
I'm waiting.
See, all that's the craziest stuff too, is it's like, it seems like anything that we could think of right now is a total possibility of it coming about.
Yeah.
Because we've seen the way that technology has evolved in the way kind of like a Fibonacci sequence, where it's just like it compiles and compiles and compiles.
Yeah. So I think the real AI is around the corner, which is going to blow away this current AI. It's going to change everything. But one thing I also want to say about this Andy Kaufman phenomenon, one of my overarching theories of reality is that this world, its purpose is to be interesting, almost like an art project. And if nothing else, the Andy Kaufman thing is interesting.
Oh, yeah.
And I think that might be the essence of our world. I have a more detailed theory about it, but it is definitely interesting. And in talking with Steve, I thought, I keep thinking I have him figured out, and then I don't know if you saw recently, Marie came in, who's someone, right?
It's great. Marie Dressler. I've seen that name on so many occasions, and it blew my mind that all of a sudden now she was in the group chat. Yeah. She's been asking a lot of great questions too. Yeah. Questions that I would never, angles that I would never think to ask.
It almost seems like he's telling her almost like a different side of the story, talking about exhuming the body and issues with the relatives and things like that, which is very different than what he was telling us.
Yes. I don't think I've ever heard him talk about the idea of Michael wanting to exhume the body, and that brings up a lot of interesting stuff, because if he was tasked with that, after Stanley dies, now bam, all right, Lynn, you release this stuff, because apparently she's the one who has videotapes and stuff, right, of Andy Kaufman after he had, supposedly, after he faked his death. And then Michael, of course, has the exhumation. That was supposed to be his job, right? Yeah. In the whole thing?
I think so. But the one thing that Steve said recently was that Andy will never reveal it because he is reveling in the pain he's causing other people. And this is sort of an angle to it that Steve has mentioned over the years, the dark side of Andy. And that he is kind of vindictive and was angry towards people and sort of loves the fact that he got this over on them and they don't know if he's dead or alive, and really dark stuff,
You know what's so interesting, because that echoes the whole idea of his Papa Sai, isn't that what he was called? His grandpa. The one who left, the parents didn't tell him he died.
Yes, I heard that.
He went on vacation or whatever. So that was always in Andy's brain, and it makes sense that would be sort of Andy's like, oh yeah? Well, they did that to me? Well, let's see how everybody else kind of feels about that. Am I dead? Am I alive? Am I dead? Am I not?
Even a while ago, he would tell me things like Andy wasn't really a nice guy and this and that. So there's always like this kind of like weird, dark side of Andy. Yeah.
What other aspects did you learn that, were unexpectedly dark?
I'm trying to think. There was something else, but I just lost my train of thought here.
Well, it's crazy because, Steven says that he has not been in contact with Andy. He doesn't know if he's dead or, he doesn't know if he's still alive. And yet, in these chats, he is making it sound like he has still been in contact.
Yeah,
with him.
He sort of goes back and forth on that. Yeah. I'm trying to think what angle. I had an angle, but I've sort of lost it. It'll come back. Yeah. Think.
But it is funny that Marie Dressler is in there now, asking questions. And stuff that I would not think to ask. And you asked a lot of extraordinary questions I would not think to ask. And it's great. And even if it was stuff that even if it was a story that you already told. Yeah. Or that you already told that I thought, okay, I think Frank already knows this, but I like the fact that even if whether he forgot it or whether he knows that he was told that, the fact that you asked again, it was great then to see, okay, is the story going to be the same? Or is it going to be a different angle coming through? And in some of the cases, it was a different angle.
Yeah, and I have sort of thought, is this... I mean, I don't know if you've been around people that have personality disorders, like narcissistic personality disorder and stuff, and people who are kind of like pathological liars and stuff. So, I mean, I always kind of wonder are we dealing with someone that just has very deep, like, does Steve have some sort of mental condition, and is he just making everything up? But he's super intelligent and super creative, and it just keeps going and going, even though there's no reality behind it. And I struggle with that because a lot of what he says is so consistent, and then other stuff is not consistent, right?
You are listening to Inspirado Projecto podcast. Yeah, make sure to check out the new concept album, Andy Kaufman is Alive, now available on Bandcamp, Spotify, Instagram, Pandora, and other music streaming sites. Now, back to Inspirado Projecto.
Like, he still talks about, the consistency of how Andy Kaufman faked his death. He's still, that story is always, it seems always, straight on the same way.
I remember what I was going to say.
Oh, yeah.
So we recently found out about this new angle with Frank Inn, right?
Oh, yeah, Frank Inn.
So Frank Inn is someone I hadn't heard of, but he was a legendary animal trainer. Every animal in Hollywood, from Beverly Hillbillies to
Benji.
To Benji.
He might have probably done Lassie.
Like all of these. So he was this animal trainer, and that Andy became friends with him. But Frank Inn was a family friend of Steve's family, and then that's how he met Andy Kaufman. So I was just randomly, this last week, looking at IMDb, and there's one piece of trivia on there, which is that Frank Inn, back in the 30s or something, he goes from Indiana out to Hollywood, and he's hit by a car, and he's presumed dead. He's in a morgue, and a medical student notices that he's has a weak pulse. So he died and came back to life. I'm thinking to myself, okay, people can edit IMDb. Did he put this in there? But no, I found other sources. I asked him about it. He's like, oh yeah, that was Andy was so fascinated by the fact that Frank Inn died and came back to life.
Incredible. So between Frank Inn and between Elvis faking his death, and he's got all these, and then his grandpa, of course, is he dead? Is he alive? We don't know. It's in that gray area.
Well, that's the thing. Like, you have, right?
Alan Abel.
Right now, we're sitting here in this bus, but everyone that you know, like my wife and the people your other bandmates, like, where are they right now? We don't see them. But they're in your mind. They're living in your mind in a way, and right. So, like, when someone passes away, they're still kind of living in your mind in a way, and that's kind of, very confusing. And I think that's sort of part of this phenomenon, right? Mm-hmm. Like how we operate normally, where we have the outside world and then there's this world inside our head.
Yes.
But the question is, does that make sense that there would be this complete outside world and then inside each person's mind they completely recreate it? Like, wouldn't it make more sense that ultimately there's just one world and that we're just accessing it internally and externally?
Well, and it's crazy too, because then there's that theory that every single person's reality is special and specific unto them and them only. Yeah. So in a sense, if I leave this bus right now, in a sense I don't exist. It's like the Schrodinger's cat kind of thing. In a sense I don't exist in your reality, because you don't see me, you don't hear me, you can't, there's nothing that can be done about that. And so it's crazy because there's this idea that the veil is thinning, like you're talking about the screen, it's thinning and thinning, and every single person is, in a sense, a parallel life of yours. And the idea that every single person is a reflection of ourselves. So, then you get deeper and deeper into that stuff, the quantum mechanics and all that razzmatazz, right?
I struggle with these issues every single day.
Yes.
It's endless existential angst, and for some reason, I know I'm not going to get an answer anytime soon or ever, but I can't help continuing to ask the questions. Because, the evidence we have is that all we know that exists is that consciousness exists, right? Because each of us is conscious. All I know is I'm conscious and observing all this weird stuff. That's kind of the only thing I can know for sure. The content of what I'm observing could be a virtual reality, a dream of a god in a void somewhere. We don't know. But the fact that I'm observing this stuff is knowable. It's knowable that I'm having this experience. And it's proven to me that I'm having the experience, right?
Yeah, and it's crazy because your perspective is just as valid as my perspective, as the person across the street. That's the other interesting thing too. You're allowed to have that experience and to perceive it through those eyeballs.
And I forget who it was. I don't know if it was Steve or someone. No, maybe it was someone else. But we were talking about the best time to be born, and I'm like, well, I really think like the time I was born in '67, so growing a little kid in the '70s, teenager in the '80s, young adult in the '90s, I'm like really analyzing history. Like that's kind of the sweet spot right there.
Mm-hmm.
Really, truly. I mean, I do feel I missed out on the earlier '60s kid stuff, which was pretty good. The Howdy Doody in the '50s and stuff, but all told, and I forget who it was, but they're like, well, yeah, that's why I think we're living in a computer simulation. What are the chances we would have been born at this exact right time? Someone that was around my own age,
Mm-hmm.
So.
Well, in the way that technology picks up, we were very fortunate to see how video games have altered all throughout the years. I used to have a Commodore 64, so to see that and to see how computers are now, the fact that here we are, it's like we got these computers basically we're talking
and this essentially being able to record and preserve endless amounts of ephemeral audio, essentially. When I started this show back in 2003, you couldn't do that yet. You would get a website for $20, $30 a month, and you could put like 10 megabytes on the website.
Oh my gosh.
And it wasn't until a few years later they started to really up the storage space. So I had to put shows starting in, it was in 2000, on a site called mp3.com, which would host your MP3s, which were so huge compared to what a website could handle. You had to go to this other website to just have 10, 20 megabytes of stuff.
Oh my gosh. So you had a link to that site, basically.
And then you could only have 10 MP3s at once on this site.
Oh man.
It was mostly for music, but it was like a huge innovation, and that's how I started the whole project. So
did you start on cassette tape as well?
Well, yeah. I mean, I did cassette tapes when I was a kid. I did kind of a proto podcast in 1990 on cassette. So I was sort of into this, for time immemorial. But cassettes, as you know, are they're very ornery and very difficult. And I still am dealing with my cassettes because I'm digitizing the last bits of everything that I have.
Wow.
And it's very hard to find a tape deck these days. I wound up getting one. It was just a Chinese model, not very good, and it was like it had already been discontinued. But I got like an open box, and it was even very expensive. The best thing to do, I had an amazing, I forget the brand, tape deck from the 80s, and it just worked and worked and worked until it didn't. And now if you want to get one of those, that's like $600,000 to get a working tape deck from the 80s.
That is crazy.
They built to last back then. I recently had to buy a Betamax to transfer my beta videos, and I got one from 86 on eBay, and it was like $200-$300. Worked perfectly. Can you imagine? From 1986, this thing was built like a tank.
Yeah.
And all my old, from in film school, we were shooting on beta, for the video class. Everything just worked.
It seems like things back then were actually built to last.
They were built so well back then, yeah. So that's why there's a bit of a devolution in technology as well.
Yeah.
Especially with consumer electronics. They used to just add so much stuff in there. But
now they call it planned obsolescence.
Obsolescence.
So they plan for it to break down. That's when your text messages start adding unnecessary letters into things, and you go, "No, I've spelled this word 100,000 times. Why are you doing this right now?"
Yeah. Oh, I want to talk about another coincidence, whatever.
Oh, yes.
You were at Treasure Island when we talked to you last.
Yeah.
It's so bizarre because I sort of planned last minute to go see Fish at Sphere.
Oh, cool.
And I had to spend enormous amounts on the tickets.
Oh, my God.
So I'm like, I can't stay at Venetian because right across the street is Treasure Island, which has seen better days and is half as much as Venetian. So I stayed there, and it was a perfectly nice place to stay. I just was very upset that they took out all the pirate stuff, which is another.
That's too bad.
Yeah,
It's like
all
the
pirate
cool
theming
thing about it. Yeah, they used to have the battles out on the ship in front.
Yeah. But it was just so weird that you were there, and I was just there a few months ago.
Oh man,
so bizarre.
When I see when stuff like that happens, I just realize, okay, you know what? Everything's in line. It's all in line.
Well, yeah. I mean, that's sort of like you have to sort of wonder what's the intent behind the whole thing. So I feel like my theory, it's whoever's out there controlling things maybe are for the purpose of maintaining it to be maintaining interestingness, which to me would be a worthy goal. Then you have to wonder how much collateral damage is okay to maintain this interestingness or this art project of this world, because it does seem on the surface that there's a lot of suffering going on and a lot of terrible things going on in this world. And is it worth it to maintain this world for its interestingness if you have to do all this bad stuff as well? And I struggle with that as well.
What, just knowing the bad stuff is happening out there in the world?
Well, if this world's being maintained like this, for sort of almost for entertainment value, I'm talking this entire Earth we're on is one of many worlds, and the scenario we're in, with all of its interestingness, has been sort of developed and maintained. But in the sort of the collateral damage is all of the suffering going on in the world, right? I know I'm not really describing it properly, but it's sort of like if this world were to become like a dystopia, like Mad Max or a nuclear war, it really wouldn't be that interesting anymore. It might be interesting for a little while, but you're like, I don't need to fight mutants in the desert, you know.
Yeah.
And if the world became like a utopia, everyone was happy, everyone had everything they wanted, it would also become kind of boring and it would not be interesting anymore. You have to maintain this middle path, right? Which I feel we're still on this middle path, where it's nowhere near dystopia or utopia. And maybe manipulation of timelines or manipulation of events using time travel. I know I'm getting on the fringes here.
Dude, I love the fringes.
To maintain this world's interestingness. But it causes damage at the same time, right? And there's suffering at the same time. So it's sort of like how much suffering is okay for this art, right? It would ultimately be art, yeah.
Well, and that's the other crazy thing too. If we are, as it's been said, that we're just spirits in a human body, and we're just kind of peeking in through this particular perspective, playing the big video game, the big simulation. So we add that to it, added with, I've through the various people that I like read, I like Dolores Cannon, I like Bashar, I like Alan Watts, all these different folks who have just gone deep into the deep dives. Dolores Cannon has found through all of her, QHHT stuff that a lot of times we actually choose our parents. We choose this particular character we're going to be. We choose how we're going to die. We choose when we're going to die. We choose this specific perspective for the fun of it, to see what's going on.
Yes.
So that is a weird thing, because then you start thinking, okay, well, the suffering that's going out there, did those people actually choose to be in there? Well, if we go with that idea that they have chosen to be characters who will suffer, what does that do then? What was the point? Well, the point would be that it's there to teach us who are not going through it something. It's there to teach us that, to go, okay, well, this is what not to do, or how not to treat people, perhaps.
Well, that kind of leads to the whole NPC question: is everyone out there a real person? And I'm very careful when I talk about this issue, because it leads to sort of, that person's an NPC. It dehumanizes them, and all of the worst examples of situations in history are related to dehumanizing people. So I don't like that, but at the same time, I can't help but wonder: is everyone out there experiencing the world like we're experiencing it, or are they just characters? It's a dangerous idea, but it's something that can't be avoided, right? When dealing with this.
It is a tricky thing, because with all of these, all these cars coming and going, in a sense right now, in our reality, as far as this specific reality is concerned, one could say they are NPCs. They're just moving along.
Yeah.
Obviously, there must be, if I want to walked up to that car and knocked on the window, I'm sure someone's going to unroll the window, and all of a sudden now we have a conversation about something.
So Dolores Cannon, on one of her videos, she's no longer with us, but she did like UFO stuff and everything, but she described something that really stuck with me.
I'm not sure.
She said that there was a situation on Earth where there was a call that went out to beings all over the multi-cosmos that they needed helpers to come in and help the Earth transition.
Yes.
And so she said specifically there were some individuals who were on something equivalent to like a spaceship, and they entered into a pod, sort of a la the Matrix, and plugged something into their head, and they're still alive on that spaceship, but then they incarnate as a human baby. And that she said that a lot of them who had no experience with this type of world were incredibly overwhelmed and regretful that they had entered into this place, because it was too much for them.
Yeah, way too heavy,
and
way too dense.
So that really, because I have had the experience of remembering like where I actually am, and it's like,
really,
it's this room with furniture almost like that color, but a little bit lighter, like light wood color. And like I'm like, my real self is there, and I'm sort of just projecting into here as this Frank Nora character. And yes, it could just be a dream or a vision or something, but I've had it multiple times. Like,
incredible.
I'm aware of like where I really am. So it was something. The Dolores Cannon thing. Yeah, it just sort of seems like you kind of do lay down and go into a comatose state. I would imagine that whoever we are at that level have greater psychic powers, so you don't have to plug something in. You could use your psychic powers to sort of tune into the mechanism, but you don't have to like plug something in the back of your head. But
now,
did
you have these dreams and these visions before you started reading Dolores Cannon?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So that must see. So then when you see stuff like that, that must all of a sudden it goes bing, 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 bing in your brain. You're going, okay, this is credible. This feels very credible for someone to be explaining a thing that I have been thinking about. That's been happening to me. Now it's like, okay, it's almost like a high five.
Yeah, and I mean, I get the sense that it's like I want to be here, but it's not like something. It's not like you completely control it. It's sort of like you come in here, and you can control some aspects of it, but you have to like roll with the punches, and you have to deal with all the crap, and you, like because you can't just get admin access and change things. So the idea is like the value of being here is that it can be a very, very rewarding experience, but obviously it's a very disturbing and unpleasant experience at some level as well.
You are listening to Inspirado Projecto podcast. Yeah, make sure to check out the new concept album, Andy Kaufman is Alive, now available on Bandcamp, Spotify, Instagram, Pandora, and other music streaming sites. Now, back to Inspirado Projecto.
Well, it's crazy because Dolores Cannon talks about how we're the director, we're the producer, we're the writer, we're the actor. We're the ones who are putting ourselves through this little movie here. And then she said one of the big reasons of us coming down here to incarnate on Earth is to awaken to being able to manipulate energy, figuring out how to do that. Because in a lot of her books, she talks about a lot of these different people she took under hypnosis. They all talk about Atlantis. They all talk about Bigfoot. They all talk about Loch Ness Monster. Every single one of these different people in all these different places. And that's what the Atlanteans were doing. They were manipulating energy. That's how a lot of these pyramids were built, with the frequencies and all that jazz.
When I was a kid, like a teenager, my parents found out about this psychic named Vincent Ragone up in, I think, Scarsdale, New York. And he was like, they just heard about him through word of mouth. You can find him. It's Ragone, Vincent Ragone. He passed away a number of years ago, but he had like a 2-year waiting list or a 6-month waiting list. He charged almost nothing, like $20 for a visit. And my parents, like some of their friends, went to him. And so I eventually went to him. And the stuff he was like, he said, sit there, don't move, don't react to what I'm saying, because a lot of psychics aren't really real, and they use something called cold reading, where they read your body language and your facial expressions, and they just sort of using averages. He's like, I don't do that. And this guy, apparently the government was aware of him, and they were testing him every year, and the presidents consulted him and stuff. Anyway, he looked at me and he's like, you were in Atlantis. He said the place that we commonly think of as Atlantis, around 15,000 years ago. But he's like, you were one of the scientists involved in the really bad experiments. He's like, you were, and I'm still haunted by this, because he's like, you were using human beings as your test subjects, and it was like people would use lab rats today. And he was telling me that I was like 17 years old or something.
That's crazy.
And he's like,
heard that.
And he's like, maybe you need to sort of atone for what you did back in Atlantis. It was so weird, because it was like, usually people are like, oh, you were like this famous celebrity in the past, but he's like, no, you were evil, kid.
Oh my gosh. Well, that's what, it's so funny, because Dolores Cannon talks about, because she said in Atlantis they were making hybrid human creatures.
Yes, I think,
and sending them into those coliseums to fight other ones.
And I can't believe, it feels so against my nature right now that I would be involved in something like that, but I guess that was a long time ago.
Well, plus, that's the other thing too. It's like a lot of, like, when she takes these people back through their hypnosis, a lot of times it's to try to solve their fear of spiders or smoking or whatever, and that's how she stumbled upon the past lives. She and her husband were just trying to take this woman down into, the depths and get rid of her smoking issues. But she accidentally went back to like the 1920s when she was a flapper. So her past life was a chain smoker. And so that, in a sense, had stuck with her. Oh, it's my buddy Frank.
Your buddy Frank, where?
Yeah.
From where?
Hey,
Frank Nora. We know him through Andy Kaufman stuff. So he has a podcast, I have a podcast.
We're both podcasting right now together.
Okay.
Yeah.
I didn't know who you were.
Oh, sorry. It was just a little cooler in here.
Yeah, I get it. All right.
Meeting another band member?
Oh, yeah. He's Baba Booey.
Really?
He's a bass player. Wait, that's his stage name.
Is it Baba Booey or?
Not from Howard Stern, but He loves Howard Stern.
I love Howard Stern too. Yeah.
He's a huge fan of Howard Stern too.
Fa fa fo fo. Fooey. Yes. That's what I was talking when Richard Simmons passed away the other day. That was a big news day Saturday. Richard Simmons and Shannon Doherty and Dr. Ruth and the assassination attempt all on one day. It was definitely not a slow news day, but I remembered Richard Simmons as a Howard Stern guest. He was fantastic on Howard Stern. If you never heard it, it's worth going on YouTube or stuff to hear. He was so good. I mean, he was like, he realized like Howard was kind of making fun of him, but he was totally in on the joke. And he was
that's great.
An incredible guest, honessly. I recommend everyone check out Richard Simmons on Howard Stern.
It's great when he gets a great guest. We heard in the when we had the other what we call the land yacht, we would play the one where he was talking to Paul Simon. That was a really good one too.
Yeah. Well, he had this TV show back around 1990, filmed out of Secaucus, New Jersey. It used to be easy to find the episodes. I don't know if it's still that easy. It was such a low-budget show. It was the most amazing TV show ever.
I remember when it was on, but it was on late at night or something, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. And it was before he was on E or any of that other stuff. It was just like this. No one knew what they were doing.
Sort of like
it
a public access
exactly.
show,
It was like Howard Stern with a public access feel. Unbelievable.
Do you have any public access stations near where you live or anything like that?
No. Well, I mean, there's this guy named Peter Bernard, which...
Peter Bernard?
Yeah.
With the American Girls?
Yes, you know him.
Yeah.
I met him through the whole Andy Kaufman thing.
Yeah.
So he used to have cable access shows in New York City.
Oh, wow.
But, my big thing is this number 209, right? And when I went to college right down the street from here in Madison, like literally 10 minutes from here, Drew University, the first day of college, I hear one of my fellow students, this is in 85, and I overhear one of my fellow students saying, I enjoy exploring the mysteries of the universe. So I struck up a conversation with him. Turns out we both had dorm room 209 in two connected dorms. That's how it all started.
Whoa.
So this was 1985, and then we continued examining 209. In fact, we went to a comic shop here in Morristown in 86, but it was closed, so we wound up going on this amazing adventure, going to a haunted music show, going to this weird graveyard in the middle of the night with people from the music store. So we thought this number 209 could create weird adventures and stuff. So what I only realized a couple years later was that, as we just had the 4th of July, in 1985, America had turned 209 years old.
Whoa!
So Peter Bernard, who we're talking about, he's also hugely into 209,
What?
Not related to me, and he got into it also in 1985.
Oh my gosh.
Through a completely different route. It had something to do with finding price stickers from a supermarket, like in the trash, and they all said 209 on them. So he discovered 209 as well when America was 209.
Oh man!
And as far as we know, we're the only like 3 people that have liked 209. But 209 is in so many movies.
Really?
In the X-Files, there was an apartment building that's called the 209, and they showed it really prominently. And it turns out that was the 209th overall episode of the X-Files. But meanwhile, I'm like, what is this 209 thing? Like, it's not big. It's just me and a couple other people. It's super obscure, but it's in, like in the Star Trek movies when Spock is like in front of the shuttle, it's shuttle number 209.
Incredible.
And in Twin Peaks: The Return, there was I kept looking for.
Did you find a 209?
There was a 209 in an apartment building, and it was you only saw it briefly, but Lauren Hughes from Love Boat was in that room.
Oh my gosh!
You know how he loved to take old TV stars.
Yes.
Because in theory, Twin Peaks is all about the evils of television. But anyway, I figured I'd mention that.
Was that the lady with the dog? Or was that the neighbor?
She was a neighbor in the yeah. It was later in the series. I don't remember exactly, but anyway. So that's another little wrinkle to all this stuff. So it's weird that I found this other 209 guy through the Andy Kaufman list stuff.
Yes.
But we still, and all 3 of us once got together on a show. So my friend Brian, who was the other guy that had dorm room 209, he thinks 209 is the code number of the simulation we're living in.
Oh.
Peter, who's also a student of the works of Aleister Crowley, which I don't really get into that stuff too much. Aleister Crowley was hugely obsessed with the number 418, which is double 209.
Oh.
And he even created a magic word, abrahadabra, changing the word from C to C to A, the letter from C to H, So it all in numerology came out to 418. I didn't know
Whoa.
that. My view is that, the world that was promised to us in the early 60s, for example, the New York World's Fair, 64 and 65, it looked like the 70s and 80s were going to become this incredible techno-utopia. And there's this whole concept of the day people versus night people. The night people is kind of like what the hippie ideal was. Everyone's kind of...
Gene Shepard talked about
Yes,
the night people.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Like, it's sort of, more like everyone is kind of equal and everyone respects each other, and, right, it's all about gentleness and pleasure and things like that, whereas the day people are all about violence, echelons of control, pyramidal control structures, insurance, war, all that kind of stuff. So the idea is that the timeline where the night people would sort of gain more of the balance, because now we're very out of balance, and that promised world, if you look back at the World's Fair, New York World's Fair, 64 and 65, the world they were describing, and there's a movie called Tomorrowland that was a bad movie, but it talked about this. The branched timeline that was the good, or the utopian timeline from there. That's what I think 209 is. It's the code number of that timeline, or of trying to achieve that balance in this world. So we all have very different ideas of what 209 is. But it has two prime factors, 11 and 19. So that's...
Yeah, and 11 is an angel number. The gateway.
Yeah. So like the place I work now, there's elevator banks, and of course the one I go to is floors 11 to 19. Yes.
Cool.
Yeah. So all sorts of weird stuff.
Are you going to write a book about 209?
Well, I sort of feel like all the shows I've done are sort of the book. Even though I am writing a book of poetry that I've been working on for 30 years, and I never wanted to keep working on, but it won't let me stop.
You just keep having more and more ideas?
So in next week is the 30-year mark, and that's going to be the end.
And then you're going to find, and then you're like, okay, now we're going to publish it.
Exactly, yeah. So, but sometimes, as you may know, creative works don't tolerate being ignored. Sometimes.
That's right. There was this thing I read about how Christopher Nolan says, no movie is actually finished. Your projects are never actually finished. You just have to make an agreement to stop it. Because you're always going to have to. We're always going to have the hindsight. We're always going to be able to look back and go, oh, I should have done this, could have tweaked that, could have done this. At some point, you just got to let the bird out of the nest.
Tell that to George Lucas with all his his tinkering.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, I also remember when I sort of had a band, but I was a non-performing member, which was very weird. But we were very involved, my wife and I were very involved in the songwriting process, and that was sort of like a negotiation with sort of an entity that is starting to exist. The song, you have to like work with the song, and you have to like negotiate with the song, and go back and forth. It's like so utterly bizarre and counterintuitive.
It is.
And you would push, and in the end, we have over 30, like, I think, amazing songs, and the band never went anywhere, but I still play the songs. So.
Oh, that's great. Do you play guitar? Do you play an instrument?
No, I tried, but I just wasn't for me.
But you guys recorded the songs?
Yes, they're all recorded, and I wrote the lyrics, and we worked on the songwriting, and yeah.
Are you going to try to distribute them through any of these sources?
Well, we have sort of over the years. Did you ever hear of a guy named Weird Paul?
Mm-mm.
He's a right now he considers himself like the first video blogger. He has a whole YouTube channel, and it's funny because a guy that is a listener of mine is a huge fan of Weird Paul.
Oh.
And I found his one album in a discount CD store in New York City, like in the late 90s.
Amazing.
And so our band did a cover song on his tribute CD to tribute to Weird Paul.
Oh, cool.
So there's some stuff out there. And I recently had this guy ask him if he remembers the band, which was called Fuzzy Dog. He's like, of course I remember them. So we live on slightly through Weird Paul, for Weird Paul Petrosky, anyone that knows him.
There are sources, there's something called Music Digi that you can use. There are a bunch of other different ones too, DistroKid, a bunch of different ones. But you can actually upload your songs on there, and then it puts it out to Spotify and iTunes.
I should do that, and recently I had a bunch of unused lyrics, right, that for the band broke up. So I started feeding them into the AI music generators.
Cool.
Suno 3.5.
Oh yeah, Suno's good. So is Udio.
Yeah, about a month ago, and these lyrics that had never been a song, complete song, sounded amazing, freaked me out, utterly bizarre, and I'm kind of reluctant to keep going down that road. There's something about it. Well, you as a musician, maybe it's very disturbing. I think this AI stuff. Because I think that when we experience any kind of art, be it music or movies or anything, books, we know deep down that another person like us worked real hard on it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's part of our appreciation of it. The AI stuff, which is just sort of kind of reverse engineered the human creative mind, you know that no one actually worked on it. At least with mine, like I actually wrote the lyrics, but you could just as easily have it write the lyrics.
Right.
It feels like it's gone too far in a way.
Wowzers. Thank you so much, Frank Nora, for coming out. He is the Rampler. Check out Overnightscape podcast. This guy is so prolific. This is the first time that I ever met Frank Nora in person. I knew about him through the AndyKaufmanLives.com shenanigans that we came across in the early 2000s. This interview was recorded on the Yachtly Crew tour bus on July 17th before Yachtly Crew played at the Mayo Performing Arts Center in New Jersey. So this is really cool. This is part 1. Part 2 is coming up. Coming up at the end of this month, today is March 19th. Coming up at the end of this month is a documentary called Thank You Very Much about Andy Kaufman. Also, please keep your ears peeled for the mini concept album I created called Andy Kaufman is Alive. That is by Kurt Eric Clendenin. It's found on Bandcamp, Reverb Nation, Spotify, Pandora, all kinds of places. But keep your ears peeled because part 2 is coming out. Thank you so much for listening to Inspirado Projecto.